Hello everyone and welcome to the Chartered Accountants Ireland London Society webinar series. This webinar is Working from Home is Not Working Alone. We have as a society been trying to adapt our offering to members in the wake of the COVID crisis, and this webinar was actually originally presented live in March, and we've updated it with the kind help of Carmel to make it more relevant to things as they're evolving, as we see the new normal evolve. So thank you, Carmel, for that. Carmel Moore is one of our own London members. She runs the One Moment company, and without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Carmel.
Thank you, Peter. I probably should say a little bit more about my background, because I'm always reminded when I'm working with a group of chartered accountants that evidence is really important. So I'm Carmel Moore. I qualified as a chartered accountant back in the early 1990s, and I've been a tax director in industry for many years, Barclays, Pfizer, and a tax partner in EY. But I've always been fascinated by the human side of our lives, and I left EY in London back in 2017 to work in the One Moment company with my partner Marty, whom you can see on screen. And the reason I have a picture of Marty there is so that you can juxtapose the two of us in your mind. Me, the recovering chartered accountant and tax partner, Marty, the Zen priest and psychotherapist. So we bring two very different sides to our thinking about time, and we came together because of a shared interest in time, and we realized, both of us, that time management was very out of date and was no longer serving us. It was a relic of the Industrial Revolution, and it started from the point of view that you and I and Peter, you too, were a bunch of wasters, and we didn't know how to manage our time. But as we know, over the past weeks since lockdown, work is no longer about shifts and clocks, even about core hours, even about 9 to 5. Work's always available to us. It's 24/7. So what we spend our time doing is help organisations be more happier and more productive by helping them understand problems and issues relating to time. And I'd like you to think about time as not real, not on your wrist, not ticking away on your phone, but it's simply an agreement in human space that helps us all here together at the same time, and also helps everything from happening at once. And we'll talk a little bit about time in the workplace and the new rules of time that we're going to need to adopt and shape as we move out of lockdown. But I also wanted to spend a little bit of time with you talking about time and your own leadership. And the secret that is your presence and how you respond in the moment to the moment. So maybe like me, you woke up this morning and you had that delicious moment between sleeping and waking, and then you realized that it was another one of these surreal days, another day without all the road markings that we used to have, the signposts that used to structure our day and how we spend our time. It's like we dimly recall the school drop-off. We'd love to be commuting again, doing the coffee run, even the back-to-back meetings, because all of these things have changed, and these were all the things that we used to use to structure our day. And when we originally delivered this webinar back in March, we realized that the content was not only still relevant, but even more so as we contemplate our return to the physical spaces that we used to occupy. Because now more than ever, I think we're realizing that the nature of time has changed, and what we do with that time is going to be very different when we get back into the workplace. The next slide, working from home is not working alone. I put this slide together to help frame a discussion with you about how our working practices have evolved over the past, I suppose, 10 weeks. It feels, just take a moment to think about whether it feels like that time has flown by, or maybe that time has crawled by, or maybe for you, that time paused and stood still altogether. Because I guess the point is that we all experience time in very different ways, but yet we assume that the way you think about time is the same way as I think about time. So let's just talk a little bit about this diagram and what's beginning to emerge. So on the far left, the little circly bit with all the little hubs and satellites sitting around it, that was the way we used to work. There was a mothership, a central location, something that we all kind of hooked around every single day. And then as we entered very quickly this period of lockdown and having to work virtually, we did this thing that I'm calling the jump on calls phase, where, you know, we rolled our sleeves up, we pitched in, we responded to the emergency, we felt good about being heroes, and we tried to make it all work. But what I've begun to observe over the past weeks is that there are a lot of companies who aren't thriving in this new virtual environment, and they're stuck somewhere between phase 2 and phase 3. And what I mean by that is, instead of really challenging themselves to embrace this new medium of working together in a distributed way, they've tended to try and simply replicate the office, the physical office and the physical meetings in a virtual way. And that's kind of exhausting, because they've had the same meetings with the same people on the same subjects and simply tried to cycle through the work as if we were still in the physical workspace, and that doesn't really work. I also have a bit of a personal problem about how we've persisted in calling this stuff that we do working from home, because I think we all have associations back from weeks and weeks ago that working from home somehow meant an exception. It was a thing we did when we had the school play, or when the gas man was coming, or whether we were coming back from a holiday or going on a holiday, and we called that working from home. And if there are two big things that we have learned from this period of work in lockdown, the two things are that work is not a location, work is an activity. Work is not a location, work is an activity. And the second big thing that we have learned is that we can trust each other. We don't have to see physically our colleagues. We don't have to see our teams to know that they're working. And if anything, people tell me, and the statistics we read say that productivity in many cases has gone up, and people are telling me that they're working as hard, if not harder, than ever before. And I would find it really sad that if we go back to the physical environment, that we pretend that we've never had trust. So to go backwards and insist on presenteeism and people showing up and having the same structures in place, it would suggest to our colleagues and our teams and our employees that we don't actually trust them. And we've had the biggest experiment in trust and culture over the past weeks. The teams that have been more successful, I think, have begun to gravitate towards the model on the right, and it's more of a community-based model. And I've seen a lot of teams break themselves down into smaller pastoral units over the past weeks. And these have become more nimble, more supportive. So an example of one client I work with, the team is about 150, and they broke themselves down into smaller groups of 10. And these folks didn't work with each other and didn't know each other, but the only thing that they were asked to do was check in once a day. Maybe they share a cup of tea, but just to check in once a day and let everyone know that they were okay. And that practice has worked beautifully, and it's emerged into something that I think this team will take out of lockdown and into the real world again. And I see another interesting dilemma for us emerging on this side of the slide, which is in a few weeks' time or months' time, please God, as we find our way back into the workplace, we know that we're going to have staggered shifts. We know we're going to have people in the office and other groups still working from home. And I think we're going to have different tribes. So what are we going to do when some people are still at home and some people are still in the office? How do we design a workplace that's inclusive for both of those groups, so that we don't start having resentment, so we don't start pointing the finger about who is where and what they're doing. So I think we've got a very interesting design dilemma to start facing into about how we design a workforce that's working in two places at once and needs to be equally available. So I think we can start thinking about how we deal with some of these questions. And what we're going to focus on today is what we've been struggling with as we work in this way. So what are the problems that we've encountered? What have we begun to learn from the problems that we've encountered over the past weeks? And really starting to identify what we need to bring out of lockdown with us. People say to me, oh, I would love to continue working like this. I would hope that I would be able to continue to have breakfast with my kids, or I would hope to be able to get a run in every day. And it's really interesting because people use words like hope and I would love to. And they seem to think of this as a solitary activity, one that they will try and achieve on their own. And actually, it's much easier than that. It's the collective agreement that is going to make us really successful here. So how do we rebuild our working lives to ensure that we get those things like having a meal with our family? It sounds so ridiculous that that's the high bar that we're aiming for, but now we've had the experience of that, it would be so emotional and we would be so nostalgic for it that I think a collective agreement about how we get that time for everyone is going to be really important. And we call this the new rules of time. And let's face it, we all know, given our profession, that the structures of commercial life will conspire to thwart us. They are still there, people waiting for us. The buildings, the lifts, the meeting rooms, the reporting, weekly, quarterly, annually, the dashboards. And if we allow ourselves simply to drift back, clutching on to personal hope, we'll lose out as humans and as a profession. And I think looking ahead to going to share, if you take just one idea that you can put into practice out of what you're going to hear next, both Peter and I will be really, really happy. So I put together, it's, I guess, a distillation of what I'm hearing and seeing going on around me at the moment. And these, I've grouped them together under different themes. So what are we learning? And what do we need to be vigilant about? And what's in there that we want to preserve and plan for and shape and carry out of this period into a new way of working. So I'm going to work, just for those of you looking at the slide, I think I'll work downwards in columns and see how that works out. So the first one, this is really interesting. So have you found over the past weeks that there are agreed core hours in your organization or your team? And I think we went into this thinking that people would be available during the traditional block of 9 to 5. And I think what we've tended to find is that's not possible for everyone. And rather than just make an assumption when we go back that 9 to 5 is going to be the thing, I wonder if we could look at this in a different way and think, what is it that our stakeholders need? Because the really great thing about a period of time working like this is we've managed, I hope, to strip away the things that aren't important and really focus in on what our stakeholders need. So do you need to think again about what the agreed core hours of your team are going to be? Are your stakeholders going to work in a different way? And the other thing I'm really curious about is, what we've had over the past weeks are virtual processes. We can no longer physically sign things. We can no longer have that meeting where we all got together to like a board meeting or a steering committee or a governance group. We no longer physically have those. So we've got much more used to managing our governance, managing all the different things we have to do through virtual processes. So I'm wondering in there if there's an opportunity for us to design these processes for keeps. If they worked well virtually, maybe there's an opportunity to do this again in the future. So I'd encourage you to think about what are the core hours that you really need to drive the business. Is 9 to 5 just a myth? I think we've probably proven it all is. And what are the new virtual processes that we could really take out of lockdown and into the real world? The second one, the little picture of people, I think they're meant to be at a desk, but every time I look at it, I think they're at a picnic table, which is an altogether nicer thought when we get out of doors again and are able to do these things that we used to take for granted. But I think what I'd like to highlight in there is we've discovered in the past weeks a different type of diversity, and that is time diversity, that people's lives have really different demands, and we've been able to incorporate and be kind and loving together around these different demands. So it's things like caring responsibilities, for example, and that people can't always start work at the same time, and people don't always end work at the same time. So I think we've had that glimpse into people's personal commitments, and we've got an opportunity now to reflect diversity in a very different way. So I'd encourage you to think about time diversity. I had a question from a tax leader on a webinar I did a while ago, and she was concerned about some of her younger members of staff who were actually serious night owls and had discovered an affinity for Xbox that we wouldn't really have if we had to get up early to get on the train to get to work at 8 or 9 in the morning. But again, that's an example, although it's probably charming, about people's different time commitments and different needs. And we discussed that all of this that we're talking about is an agreement, and to have a conversation with a member of staff to say, you know what, our core hours are now this, and whatever they do themselves later on in the evening is probably their own business. So I think we can reflect people's different needs and commitments and agree core hours in a way that's much more nuanced and sensitive. Another thing, if we look at the cup of tea on the bottom left-hand side, is I think while we were in the early stages of lockdown, we had a high degree of care for each other. We were really focused on making sure that everyone was okay. And I think as the weeks have gone on, I think there's a tendency for some colleagues to just fall off the radar. And I think we need to challenge ourselves again to make sure that we are taking care of everyone, because in my experience, there were a lot of folks that were very gung-ho at the beginning and piled into this with great heart and great intention. But as the weeks have gone by, people are getting more lonely. Their ability to motivate themselves is maybe harder. Maybe they're working harder. So I think we need to pause and understand what is it that people need now and how we can take that forward post-lockdown. The next one is about available time. And I've really challenged myself to think about how on earth does one lead from behind a screen? How do you become available? And it's really easy when you walk into the office every day, people see you and can come up and ask you questions. But in a time when leadership is the most important and so much in demand, the quality of our leadership is so important. How do we lead from behind a screen? And one thing I've seen people adopt with a great degree of success is using this virtual medium to be available to many people at the same time. And I think, Peter, if you're there, I know you've been experimenting a little bit with this. What's been happening?
Well, when we first recorded this, about a month, about 10 weeks ago now, I was, like you said, trying to make sure that my team members were still connected. So I did the usual set up a meeting mentality. And the daily check-in was useful because maybe I might not be working with one person on a particular project, therefore it could be a week in normal circumstances that I wouldn't have a direct conversation. But I think we realized quite early on that, we were maybe having 15-minute catch-ups when there was nothing really to catch up on every day. And it maybe felt a bit forced for me to set something up and then call them into their home on a particular day. And one of the tips that you gave us in this course before was around open time and making yourself open. So I now have a 35-40 minute slot in my calendar where the WebEx is open. Any member of the team can drop in or drop out of that, and it feels more natural in virtual desktop, because there might be days where no one drops in, and that's fine. I get on with my work, but at least people know that there's a time in the day where there's nothing that's more important to me than their presence and their time, and I can support them in the way that suits them. Interestingly, with the new virtual catch-ups, in the way they are, I probably got to know some of my team members on a very different level, because when you're in the office, you go into work mode, you talk about the task at hand, you might ask the how are you doing question, which then gets slammed down with I'm fine. But actually, when you're in someone's home and you're seeing what environment they're working in, they open up a bit more, and they are much more willing to say, well, actually, I have to get to the supermarket today because I've only got a click and collect slot for 3 o'clock. Or kids are on the floor shouting and screaming, I have them myself. And I've got to know people an awful lot better, and that has been different, very different for me, because I've worked with some of these guys for a year, maybe 2 years, and not had that level of connection with, but strangely over a computer screen, we've been able to get there. So yeah, it's been a learning curve, I think, on adapting to the teamwork and working from home, but still working in different circumstances.
And not alone,
Not
not
alone.
working alone. Yeah. And it would be such a shame for us to lose that connection as we emerge from this and pretend this experience never happened. So
yeah, I think it's been an experience. We've never had to go into this level of lockdown or unprecedented challenge before. Even the big events we talk about, 9/11, the 7/7 attacks in London, they had an impact, but because we were going back to our normal offices afterwards, the impact wasn't as lasting. Whereas as we move into the next phase of the new normal, the new reality, I do think there will be things that we have to adapt to, and working from home is going to become the norm for a lot of people. Twitter came out this week and said that they will allow their employees to work from home if that's what they want to do going forward, because they've had that transition of trust. They know people are able to be productive and manage all their commitments. So I do think that working from home is going to become much more commonplace, and the taboo of we're working from home, therefore there must be something else going on that might detract you from your work. That's going to fall away, and we just need to make sure that wherever people are working, people could be working on the beach in Barbados for all I care, as long as they get the job done. It's trusting people to do the work, I think, will become more commonplace now wherever they may be.
And I think sometimes we have the opposite problem. I know there's the work that you and I've been doing together, and I don't know if it's a particularly Irish thing, but a discussion around feeling the need to be at your computer all the time, as if someone's watching, I don't know, God or your mother or someone, but a real sense that we need to be at the screen. It's what I've seen it called digital presenteeism. And if we're focused on outcomes rather than outputs and punching the clock, there's really no need to feel guilty about taking a problem and walking that problem around the block. We don't need to be glued to a screen in order to work like this, which is probably a neat segue into, thank you, Peter, a neat segue into the next two icons, which I'll try and deal with at the same time because they're particular bugbears of mine. I think at the beginning of this, we had the novelty of the technology and our ability to have a camera and see people. And I think for the first few weeks or probably the early period of this, there was almost this insistence that we turned people's cameras on the whole time. And I think we've probably got a little bit exhausted by this, and it's almost like work, the nature of work has turned into these types of meetings back to back to back. And it's almost like there's some rule that says when the camera is on, we have to perform and talk. And I don't know, I find it's kind of got a ghastly performative nature to it, that maybe it's the camera and microphone icon, but it's absolutely exhausting. And I thought it was just me, and I read some interesting stuff recently that said there's a study starting, I think, at Trinity College at the moment, that is looking at the impact of this way of working on our voices, because we tend in this mode, when it's not face to face, like in a room where you can see someone and pick up all the other cues, body language, whatever it might be, that our tendency is to raise and strain our voices because we're in this medium. And there's a study being done on how this is affecting our vocal cords. But I find for me that the constant talking, and I love to talk, is beginning to affect my voice. And the other factoid, which is interesting, is the teledermatologists in the US who diagnose skin conditions online, they've noticed a massive increase, like 60% increase in their consultations. So this way of working is exhausting, absolutely exhausting. So I'm wondering what it is that we do now that we seem to have confused work with these video conferences. It reminds me of, I'm digressing a bit, but I was working with a client in Hong Kong, and I remember asking her over Zoom very early one morning, I just asked her, you seem really busy, when does real work get done? And she looked at me across all those thousands of miles and said, the real work gets done, or my real work gets done, before my team come in the morning and after they go home in the evening. And I think these back-to-back video calls are giving us that same feeling that there is no time to work anymore. So a couple of things I'd like to suggest to you that people have been trying out. One is simply making shorter meetings. We've fallen into the trap of taking the hour or 30 minutes that's been suggested by Microsoft or Google when we do a calendar invite. There's absolutely no reason why the business of the day can't be done in a 45-minute slot, so that we've got more time or punctuation between all of those different meetings. And I've also seen people doing things like making the purpose of the meeting much, much clearer. So making the agenda just much punchier and making the outcome really, really, really clear, and hand in hand with short meetings. That's been really effective. The other thing, I've put probably a very knobby word, modalities on there, but I mean something very simple by this. When we log on to a session like this, we have our voice and we have a look and there are slides, and it's all very samey. But there is nothing to say that we can't mix it up during the time that we have. So I've seen little experiments that are proving very successful. So a colleague was reporting that in a meeting the other day, she gave everybody first 10 minutes of the meeting with their cameras off to simply read the slides. And the quality of the meeting after that was much better because everyone had a chance of being on the same page. And then the other thing I've seen people do is use writing. I know that sounds weird, journaling, as another way to break up the samey nature of all of this. And what I mean by that is maybe 10 minutes before the end, you could ask people to turn their cameras off, and like I might do with you now, and say, why don't you turn your camera off and take a couple of minutes just to jot down the main points of what we've been discussing. And that's quite relaxing to do, and it's broken up the strain of concentrating on the screen and having to listen so hard. And it turns out that the quality of what people play back is actually much higher as well. So you don't need to talk the whole time and look the whole time using these technologies. There are ways, creative ways of just breaking it up so that the work actually gets done during these sessions. I've also seen some interesting things that we do in the One Moment Company. So sometimes we'll work synchronously and asynchronously. And again, big long words, but what do I mean by that? So sometimes I'll get together with Marty and we will work on something together with the cameras off and the sound off. And it's like co-working or working side by side. So I know that he's there if I want to ask any questions or I've got a bright idea, and ditto him. And because you've got somebody working with you and you're available to each other, not only is it a lovely feeling, but it also ramps up the accountability. Like I feel I need to get the job done while we're working together. And then sometimes we'll jump on a call like this and we'll work out what it is we need to do. And then we'll close the line and work synchronously. So I'll go off and complete my thing and then come back to him, and we'll both work together to resolve it. So there are different ways of using the technology and not fall into the trap that it's all about performance and talking and looking at slides and looking at each other. So that's the middle column. Moving on to the third column, I've seen teams actually prescribing meetings that the whole team needs to commit to. And that could be things like a weekly update, for example, or a social session, but putting those chunks of time in people's calendars and making sure that they know that it's really important. Because I think people fell into the trap of thinking, well, I'm fine. I'm thriving here at home. It's all working out great for me. But it's showing up for the other people in the team that maybe aren't doing so well and creating a sense of community. So having meetings that you're really clear that everyone commits to, I think is going to be really important as we transition into this new phase where some of us are in the office, other people are at home, and we swap over on a staggered basis. The next thing I picked out for you is calendars. And I know it sounds all very kind of dull and operational, but I think we can use our calendars by keeping them open and up to date to the whole team, and being more discerning and nuanced about how we use our calendar so that people know the sort of time that we're in. So if you've got something that you really want to work on and you need some quiet time to do that, having your calendar open and available to those around you and making that really clear, I think that's a really useful thing to do as well. So I think we've fallen into the trap of thinking that our calendars are, the things that are driving our lives. I'm back to back, my calendar's a nightmare. But I think we've reached a point where the technology can be our friend in this respect and be used to communicate to people what is going on around us. And then the last one that I've picked out is because I was on a call with a poor young man the other day who said he was sitting there and the number of digital intrusions and intervention that was happening while I was talking to him was just extraordinary. It felt that he could be what's the word I'm looking for here? He could be summoned by multiple different technologies. So as I was sitting there, he was getting emails, he was getting WhatsApp messages, he was getting text, he was getting messages on Teams. And I think the technology has the potential to bring us together like it's doing now, but it's also got the potential to overwhelm us create multiple intrusions in the day. And it's almost like, because we can't see people, we just assume they're available. And it's almost like texting them as we see them walking into the bathroom. So what I've seen some teams do is to start to agree which technologies you use for certain things. If it's a chat, it's a chat. If it's an email, it's an email. But just choosing the subject and matching it to the digital channel rather than this technology free for all that we can create when we can't see each other. So there's some of the things that I think we've been encountering and learning from over the past weeks. And I think we can zoom in and look at them all individually, but we can also zoom out and say, as a basis for creating an agreement for your team, could you take different aspects of these and create like a written agreement or charter about how these things might work? It would be a wonderful team exercise as we move out of lockdown and into the workplace, whatever it's going to be like. But could you see a wonderful team exercise of creating this agreement and documenting it and knowing that these are going to be the new rules of time for your team? So I'll leave you there just for a moment to reflect and just maybe jot a couple of things down that have jumped out at you. So let's see how we're doing on time. I think we're doing well. So the next thing I wanted to do was to talk about you. And in the midst of taking care of others, it's very important that we are okay ourselves. And I think the leaders I'm working with, they tend to take care of others first and not realize that they need to have some recovery time for themselves. And I think during the day, there's a lot to distract us. There's the potential for a great deal of anxiety. And as we transition from one thing to the next, it's really easy to have a day that has no anchor, no points, no stop off points. We get up, we put on our headphones, we tether ourselves to our laptops, and we power through the day. And we don't always schedule in a little bit of time for ourselves to recover from a difficult conversation, from an intense meeting, from the kids knocking at the door and trying to bombard you with requests for all sorts of things. We don't have a lot of time to change state between the different meetings that we have. How do you go from a meeting that's a brainstorm, for example, a virtual brainstorm, into one that's a technical update? And it's hard sometimes in this medium to stay focused. So the technique that I'm going to share with you next is called 1 moment meditation. And before you recoil from your screen in horror and think, good Lord, this is not for me, meditation is for people who like bells and spa days and that lovely experience. This is a technique that thousands, tens of thousands of people have used around the world, and it's specifically designed for people like us who really don't get on with meditation, because it's brief and it can be done anywhere, and you don't need any special equipment like a cushion or a seashore or the sound of waves or whales. It seriously is, people, 1 minute long. And I'm going to teach it to you now. There are 3 really simple steps. There is a warm-up, which I'll take you through, which tells you what to do. There is 1 minute, 60 seconds of meditation, and a very, very short cool down. So if you're ready, let's make a start. So the first thing to do is just clear the clutter around you. Maybe you need to straighten a paper or get the cat off your lap or move a pen, but just clear the clutter from around you. Sit upright in a relaxed way and notice how you did this. Try sitting upright again with ease, because it's possible to be awake and relaxed at the same time. You can close or half close your eyes. And if you can, place both feet on the floor, feeling the connection to the floor. Push your feet gently into the floor, and in doing this, notice how your spine lengthens. Try not to use the back of your chair. You don't want to fall asleep, but to be awake and present and ready for what's next. Lengthen your spine, including the back of your neck. Imagine your head being lifted. Drop your shoulders. And place your hands in any position that's balanced. And notice how your state of mind may have changed simply by sitting in this posture. You can meditate in any position, but this one is considered ideal. For most people, this is the easy part. The harder part is to know what to do with your mind. Keep it simple. Focus on your breathing moment by moment. So focus on your breathing moment by moment. And even though it's a minute, I guarantee that you'll get distracted. This is perfectly normal and isn't failure. So here's what to do if you get distracted. Just say something non-judgmental to yourself, like, and bring your mind back to your breathing, taking it moment by moment. That's all you have to do, is focus on your breath moment by moment. And you don't have to worry about time or a minute, because I have time for you. So begin. And now, before opening your eyes, take a moment to notice what you're feeling right here where you are. And now gradually open your eyes. I hope you enjoyed that and are feeling ready for what's ahead. So we've covered what are the new rules of time that may emerge from lockdown, and what's our role and our part in creating these for ourselves and for our teams. And we've also learned together a new technique, 1 moment meditation, which may be really useful to you in the days and weeks ahead. So as we draw to a close, I'm going to turn to Peter for some final reflections, and no doubt a question or two, Peter, knowing you as I do.
Oh, well, that's the auditor in me, isn't it? So Carmel, thank you so much for updating the previous presentation. There's certainly a new wave of considerations for working from home as we've been in this for now for 10 weeks and moved to a blended approach where we're working from home and working from the office. And I suppose in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, how do we not fall into old habits when we move into the next phase, and how do we not default to not ignoring but forgetting about people who aren't in the office with us, and when there are clusters of people working from home in different locations, and in some respects, and maybe I'll answer my own question here, is that commitment that you mentioned, that no one will fall behind. But is there anything else that we need to consider about making sure that those of us that continue to work from home aren't forgotten about in the nicest possible way?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. I think you talked about commitment, and I think it's working both ways. I think while our companies and our businesses have a duty to us to check that we're doing fine and to make sure included, I think what we've discovered in this period of lockdown is a commitment to each other. And I think what I'm seeing is in teams self-organizing to make sure that no one gets left behind and not relying on policies, processes and procedures. So I think we're going to need to have a lot more dialogue about how it's working, and we're going to need to come together, create the agreement, and then test if it's working. So I think it's down to everybody, not just leadership or the HR department or the person in charge of employee engagement, to take care of each other and create the agreement formally and keep testing whether it's working or not, because it's never going to be static. I think we're going to learn as we go, and I think the things that we agree may work about core hours might need to be updated in another 2 months time or whatever. I think we're learning and evolving as we grow. And I think maybe over in the past we've maybe not prioritized functions in the business, like the people who look after wellness, for example. Maybe they had an office in your basement next to the post room, or L&D. Maybe we haven't prioritized those things, but I think they're going to be such an important part of bringing us back and helping us to do that safely with consideration for each other.
Yeah, and I suppose one other thing that's just sort of come to mind now is around the impact this will have on us as a business, but also the impact it has on us as individuals. And remembering that no two people are experiencing working from home during lockdown in the same way, and just being cognizant that we're not all the same, that when we return to work with whatever the companies tell us to do, and when that time is right, of course, that people will need to understand that that transition will affect them in different ways too. So a couple of things that I know we talked about, the fact that I've started the open time in the day for my team. The other one, which you reminded me of this time when we did the re-recording, was around agreeing the platforms, which unfortunately I've fallen back into an old habit of trying to get someone on WhatsApp, and I couldn't get them on Messenger, and so it's just sort of reinforced something for me not to fall back into the old habits again. Is there anything else, do you think, just to leave members with this is one thing you might want to try, if they're going to take nothing else in this webinar today, what would you say is the core piece for them?
I think the core piece is talking about it, because we've never talked about time in this way before. I think it's creating those agreements is going to be the most important thing at team level, and actually challenging ourselves to create these new ways of working. And I would encourage every single person to experiment with one thing. And if it's I'm probably banging on a bit here, Peter, but I think we're probably too wired for success. Yeah, and we want all this to be great and right, and we're afraid of getting wrong. I think micro practices is the way to go. So pick one small thing that you're going to do and experiment with it and tell everyone that that's what you're going to do. So the best example of that I've seen recently is a group that I'm working with that are making their meetings 45 minutes long. They're trying it for a week. They're going to come back and tell me how they're doing next week on Tuesday at a meeting, which is still an hour long. Actually, I must remind them to make it shorter. But pick one tiny thing, pick a micro practice, tell everyone you're experimenting, and then test and see how it goes.
And that rings true to me because I'm attending a leadership course at the moment, and the 1 degree of change is a common thing. You know, you're not going to change people's personality, ways of working overnight on a major basis. It has to be small degrees of change.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, I agree. Shall we bring it home, Peter?
We will. So, Carmel, I know we've a very special way of ending webinars that is a signature of the One Woman Company. So I'll hand over to you in a second. But first of all, thank you so much, not only for doing this webinar for members once, but re-recording, as we learned new ways that things have changed over the last couple of months. Also, thank you very much to Chris O'Donoghue from Chartered Accountants Ireland. He has been our tech man on all of our webinars to date and has kept a cool head when we've had gone under pressure a couple of times. And finally, also, thank you to Denise Jones, our events executive here at the London Society. Without her tenacity and I think few choice words to me on occasion, things wouldn't happen the way they do. So thank you to Denise, and of course the committee that you'll see more of over the coming months as we go through these webinars. So the Institute obviously are still around. They have their own set of webinars which are very diverse actually. A lot of work has gone into supporting members via the COVID hubs. If you haven't seen that already, please check it out. Chartered accountant support is still available from practical, emotional, and any other method of support you may need. So check that out. So from the London Society, thank you very much everyone for watching. Hope you find this useful, and if you have any other feedback on things you want us to cover off in future webinars, please let us know. Take care.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to end with a poem, and this is a poem by the wonderful late John O'Donoghue, and it's called On Waking. I give thanks for arriving safely in a new dawn, for the gift of eyes to see the world, the gift of mind to feel at home in my life, the waves of possibility breaking on the shore of dawn, the harvest of the past that waits my hunger, and all the furtherings this new day will bring. Thank you, everyone.